Hi, everybody. Welcome to The Allure of the Memoir. I did some research this week, and I found that about a year ago, Michelle Obama's memoir was making headlines because it had sold 10 million copies within the first 5 months. Yes, I think people are finding the memoir alluring. All nonfiction is up on Amazon. The past 5 years is up about 20%. And within that, for hardcover, memoir is the hottest selling genre. For ebooks, it's second in nonfiction, just behind spirituality and religion. For myself, right now I am listening to Alicia Keys' More Myself memoir, and I find it fascinating how she grew up, how her talent was fostered, how her career was developed, and what it's like to be that spectacularly successful in life. Also, on the other hand, she does a lot of good works, and that's what makes her such a special person. On the other side, a regular person like Cheryl Strayed, who wrote Wild, is inspiring to me. She went on an 1,100-mile trek up the Pacific Coast Trail to find herself. If she can do that, then I can face whatever problems I have in my life. So, memoir is alluring, and we have 5 alluring panelists for you today who have all written memoir. Let me just tell you how we're going to do this. I'm going to introduce each panelist right before they go, and then they're going to talk for a while. I'm going to have some follow-up questions for each one of them, and then I'm going to have questions for the whole panel to address. So first up is going to be Sue. Sue William Silverman has a new book. It's called How to Survive Death and Other Inconveniences. This thematically linked collection of essays from the University of Nebraska Press charts Silverman's attempt to confront her fears of that ultimate unknown. I'm finding it a delightful read, by the way. Her memoirs include also The Pat Boone Fan Club, Lovesick, One Woman's Journey Through Sexual Addiction, which was also a Lifetime television original movie. And she has a book on craft as well. It's called Fearless Confessions, A Writer's Guide to Memoir, which took honorable mention in Forward's Review's Book of the Year Award. Sue, take it away.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here with you and the other panelists. Yes, my new book is How to Survive Death and Other Inconveniences. And it does explore my fear of death. But I think from the title, which I wanted to sound somewhat irreverent, I did want it to be clear that the book was meant to be in part ironic. Because without irony, the book really would have been too much doom and gloom. So don't get scared by the title. It isn't that dark, really. And because I think that you can be funny and serious at the same time. And I meant for the dark and the light sections to kind of balance each other out in order to portray a kind of range of my feelings surrounding death. And I think that one of the powers of memoir is that we have this use of a reflective voice to better understand past events, which can involve seeing humor in a situation that really did not seem funny at the time. One other thing is that as people have been asking me about, like, why are you scared of death? And the strange thing is that it's one of my earliest memories. I mean, I remember being scared of dying, like back really in third grade.
Wow.
And I know. And it's that part I remember. I saw my grandfather in a casket, and it's
Mhm.
sort of like, how could this man who used to like play pickup sticks with me now be in this box? And I just knew that I never wanted that to be me. But I also have to say that my fear then deepened when later I was sexually assaulted. And afterwards, I felt as if my body had been stolen, that I'd lost control of it. It was no longer mine. And to me, that really did feel like a form of death. Now, this book um, is my fourth memoir. And I'd like to say a little bit, talk about the form a little bit too, because this
Please do.
book, thank you, because this book is more of a series of essays. In other words, it's not one continuous storyline like my first two books were. This it's what I really call a memoir in essay form. And I think that it's a perfect format when you're exploring one theme, but from various angles. So, in How to Survive Death and Other Inconveniences, I'm writing not only about my fear of physical death, but also what I would call kind of spiritual or emotional deaths, things like divorce, illness, addiction, or like that sexual assault I mentioned. So it's like with each essay in the book, it's almost like turning the lens of a camera and examining how kind of seemingly disparate memories still all speak to the same thing. So, for example, in this book, there's an essay about my obsession with the singer Adam Lambert, in case you've heard of him. And but there's also an essay about the cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer. So clearly very dissimilar. Yet each, yeah, you can go ahead and laugh. Go ahead and laugh at my obsessions. That's all right. Because it is weird. I mean, I'm obsessed with Adam Lambert and I am obsessed with Jeffrey Dahmer. You know, so clearly very dissimilar, but each in vastly different ways does reflect my fear of death. And that's something I could really have only pulled off in something like a memoir in essay form. I should also say that the book is kind of set up kind of like a road trip. It begins when I'm kind of cruising down Route 17, which is this industry blighted highway in New Jersey. And but as I'm on this road trip, what I'm doing is I'm collecting memories. And more than collecting them, I'm also collating them. And sort of the idea behind all of that is that if in case I personally am not able to survive death, although I'm really holding out for the fact that I will be able to survive it. But worst case scenario, if I don't survive death, it's like the memories will still live on and the memories will be immortalized. So all of these different essays, you know, say the one about Adam Lambert or Jeffrey Dahmer and a lot of other things that I write about, each is its own kind of distinct memory around this theme. And so hopefully, as I say, my memories will be immortalized if it turns out that I'm not.
I have a couple questions for you, Sue.
Sure.
Your memoir, Lovesick, was made into a Lifetime movie. What were the upsides and downsides to that experience?
So, really, I'm very lucky because my experience was fantastic. There's no downside here. The
Wow.
actors, yeah, I know, I'm lucky. The actor Sally Pressman totally captures my essence, and I even have a cameo in the movie. And
Fun.
I know it really was, sort of my big claim to fame. And but everybody in the production felt very committed to it. So I love the movie. And I should say that
Who played you?
Sally Pressman. And she was a star on Army Wives. And I should say that both Lovesick and my first book, Because I Remember Terror, Father, I Remember You, those two memoirs do have a straight through narrative. And in fact, maybe I should even talk about kind of the difference between the two.
Sure.
In that, so I have 4 memoirs, and I know that that sounds like a lot for, like, one small life. Like, how did you get 4 memoirs? And I promise you that I promise you I'm not egotistical, and has nothing to do with that. But a memoir really is just a slice of a life, and it's following only one theme. So that in Because I Remember Terror, Father, I Remember You, that focuses just on my incestuous family.
Uh-huh.
And then Lovesick is about 28 days I spent in rehab for sex addiction. And then my third book is one of the ones that's also a memoir and essays. And that's the Pat Boone Fan Club, My Life as a White Anglo-Saxon Jew. And it's about my very quirky search for spirituality. Clearly, that's going to be quirky. And then this new book about death is, it's about my fear of dying, and also trying to sort of discover the origins of that fear. And then I also do have a craft book, Fearless Confessions.
I was going to ask you. Yeah. It's called Fearless Confessions. How is a writer able to become fearless in writing about their memoir? Because they're going to expose a lot about themselves.
Right. Exactly. So if you're going to write a memoir, I think that you've got to be sort of fearless, which means really being emotionally authentic. It's writing to those dark places. Mm-hmm. It's really taking emotional risks. You have to be willing to do that. Mm-hmm. We must write deeply in order to understand kind of the fullness of our lives, and also just sort of fearlessly discovering our metaphors, because a lot of writing memoir is discovering what our metaphors are.
Okay, Sue, so we will get back to you later. Next up is going to be Ray Richman. He is the founder and president of Family Sleuth Memoirs, where he ghostwrites and collaborates on memoirs and family histories for clients both famed and not as well known. One of his most recent clients is film legend Janice Page, who just published her book, Reading Between the Lines, a Memoir. Ray Richman, you're up.
Thanks so much, Robin. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for asking me. The question is asked often, how I work with people to write their memoirs. And first of all, I assure them that a memoir or family history is the most lasting gift you can give your friends or loved ones. But first, I have to get them past the idea that their life isn't all that interesting. Even the people that hire me, they are always fearful that their life is horribly dull and that this is all for naught. And oh my God, they've made a horrible mistake. And once I talk them off of that ledge, I help them to organize their thoughts and ideas and outline their life in something approximating chronological fashion. Biggest challenge is probably in tapping into their voice. So the book sounds like something that's coming out of their mouth rather than out of mine.
Interesting.
And that typically requires at least 3 drafts, or usually more, to get it right. But I don't rest until we do. What I preach to people in terms of, what the advice I would have for others who are writing or collaborating their memoirs, I preach more than anything patience and stamina. Those are the people that hire me don't have a lot of clue about what the writing process entails. The operative word being process. And they think they should be able to have a manuscript in a week or 2 and a book, inside of 6 weeks. And, so as the memoirist, I have to be sure that my clients understand that these works of art don't come together overnight and in fact require lots of TLC, taste makes waste, all of that. And the word I say more than any other when I'm working with people is chill. Because they have to always chill. They're always like, oh my God, this is horrible. What do we do now? You have to be a shrink and a best friend as well as a writer.
Sounds like doing your taxes.
Yeah, well, by
With
the
an
end of a
accountant.
project, exactly. Well, it feels a little bit like you've survived D-Day together by the end of a project. And speaking of which, Janice Page was D-Day, writing the memoir with her, reading between the lines. This provided one of the biggest challenges of my life. I mean, one is that fact that the woman is 97 years old. She may be the oldest person to ever have completed a memoir, like in the last decade. She worked with Fred Astaire, Robert Mitchum, all these golden age stars in the 50s and 60s. She has all these memories of the Great Depression. She's tough as nails. She still has all of her marbles, though, as she would often assure me at least once a day. The thing is, she's actually an awfully good writer. She'd already written enough to fill 3 books over the previous 35 years or so. And my job was really one of editing, culling, reassuring her that this was all very good. But that was kind of a double-edged sword, because the more I told her how good it was, the more she would dig in her heels and refuse to change anything. And when I say not anything, I mean not a thing. We'd have these hour-long arguments over my request to change an adjective. She once browbeat me for an hour because I dared change the words nightclub appearance to gig. She was like, "We didn't have gigs. That's one of those words you young people use." And I'm like, now, I did appreciate being referred to as a young person. That's something nobody's accused me of in a long time. But, for her, everybody that's not in their 80s is young. This woman has a living stepdaughter who's 87. So anyway, Janice was not an easy personality to navigate. We played this cat and mouse game, for 16 months, wound up collaborating though on a tremendously colorful, candid, revealing book. And there it is, available at finer online bookstores everywhere. I respect the hell out of the woman despite it all.
How much can we really get to know a celebrity through their memoirs, Ray?
Well, Robin, actually, it kind of depends. I think we can get to know them surprisingly well. You have some stars who are using their memoir to, paint this sugar-coated picture of their lives, but I honestly don't think that's the norm. By the time a celebrity has decided, to look back at their story, they're generally done fictionalizing and embellishing, I think, and are looking to set the record straight. I mean, I've worked with 2 people who insisted that their story be unflinchingly honest. One of them was William Sanderson, the great character actor whom I collaborated on Yes, I'm That Guy. He had this crazy life loaded with boozing and drugging and arrests and all variety of stuff that made him look like a bastard. But he wanted the story told, warts and all. And the same was true of Janice Page. She went through a terrible time emotionally following the death of her 3rd husband in 1976. And talked about seeking out therapy in the 80s during a time when people in the public eye just didn't do that. But she was proud of it and never flinched about putting it in the book. And in terms of celebrity memoirs, I might recommend right now, I don't know how many of you have read Bossy Pants by Tina Fey. Really smart, really funny, just a terrific book. Stories I Only Tell My Friends. Surprisingly, Rob Lowe has written a great memoir. You wouldn't think that coming from him. Inside Out by Demi Moore, very good book.
I was surprised how much I liked Demi Moore's book.
I know, me too. In Pieces by Sally Field. Oh my God, has she been through the ringer, that woman. Becoming, of course, by Michelle Obama, which you mentioned at the outset. Me by Elton John, surprisingly candid and honest. And Life by Keith Richards. Have you ever read Keith Richards' memoir? Oh my God. Every drug, every groupie, everything is in that book. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you, Ray. Well, you'll have more time to contribute later, and we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Robin.
Our third speaker today is going to be Diana Lee Brown. She's somebody I'm pleased to say I've worked with very closely as a coach and editor. At 5 years old, Diana was frozen in time with an ambiguous loss, the kind of loss where there was no closure. The U.S. government could only report that her father went missing in action while flying a combat mission in North Korea. Her memoir, Flyby, is a compelling story that chronicles Diana's search for peace and healing while still living with the wondering and not knowing of what happened to her father. In addition to being an author, Diana has been a licensed marriage and family therapist for 25 years. Flyby took the prize Most Inspirational Book of the Year in the IRWIN Awards last year. Diana, take it away.
Thank you, Robin. And thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks. So I was inspired to write my memoir because I wanted to remember and honor my father for his service. Since he went missing in action and I was only 5, it was a hard time because I didn't know him. And I grew up as if he didn't exist. There wasn't even a memorial service for him. And then when 9/11 happened, and I watched the Twin Towers fall, I felt such deep sorrow that I realized I was still stuck in my own grief, and struggled with not knowing what happened to my father or his body. And I realized that the families of 9/11 may be facing that same pain and have to live with a lot of what the thoughts and feelings that I lived with. So I felt a real urgency to write because now it wasn't just about me. I felt like my story had a bigger impact, could have a bigger impact. But
it reminds me of what's happening to people now, where they can't go with their loved ones into the hospital, and they just have to leave them.
Right. It's
and
really,
hope for the best. It's very hard.
Yes, it's really about missing the connection. But in order to write my story, I needed to know my dad. And I had few memories of him because I was so young. And all of his family was deceased. So the only one I had to find information about my dad was my mother. And she was my biggest challenge because she didn't want to talk about him. And anytime I'd ask a question, she'd get angry. So finding out more from her meant I had to keep facing her anger, which I did because I wanted to write the story. And I also searched the internet to try to find other pilots who might be alive who knew my father. And then ultimately, I became a certified pilot myself to really feel a reconnection to his love. I doing what he loved, flying. And I also wanted to honor him with my own flyby. And then shortly before, about a year before I finished writing, I was invited by Vice President Pence to attend the honorable carry ceremony in Hawaii.
And what is that?
That was when 55 cases of remains were returned from North Korea. And so to actually be present when cases of remains had come back from Korea, it was such a surprise and honor to be invited to accompany him to that ceremony. And actually, it brings tears to my eyes thinking about it even right now.
Because you were hoping maybe he might be there.
Right, because I don't know. It would be, such a gift to actually be there if he came home in one of those cases. So that was a unexpected gift. So I hope my readers, what I would like for them is that even if we get stuck in grief, because grief is not something we want to talk about, and we don't want to go through it either to heal. So I'm hoping that they'll know that healing is possible. And I hope my efforts to be vulnerable and courageous come through to the readers and instill some sense of hope for those that might be facing or dealing with grief. And lastly, I'd like to just give a little bit of advice for those that are recovering from an ambiguous loss, the kind of loss that doesn't end. It's ongoing. That kind of loss is more complicated and difficult to heal because it doesn't have an ending. So the challenge is to be willing to show up, face the pain, and be and be with it. When it keeps intermittently showing up in your life, because it does. But with support, you will learn to live with the ongoing uncertainty and unanswered questions, and the pain will diminish, and you'll find peace of mind, even if you're still living with that person missing from your life. So back to you, Robin.
Oh, thank you, Diana. I just found your story so amazing. All the things you did to get to know your father, because your mother wouldn't talk about him. And I think you were a teenager by the time she finally did start saying something, and how you connected with the military and got to know his buddies that served over there with him. And you learned to play boogie woogie because he liked to play that kind of music, and became a pilot because that was his love.
Right.
So it was just amazing. Your entire life was dedicated to honoring him and getting to know him. And it's just really a beautiful story. And I won't give away the ending. I noticed you didn't.
Right.
To find out what ultimately happened and how she was able to honor her father, you need to get the book. Thank you, Diana.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so our fourth speaker is Bilal Alaji, and he is an entrepreneur, mentor. Alaji. Bilal Alaji. He is an entrepreneur, mentor, investor, and motivational speaker. With over 15 years working with youth in group homes, transitional housing facilities, and corrections, he uses his experience to motivate youth. He's also known as Logic the Official, and he spent 20 years as an MC. In his best-selling memoir, This Ain't My Life, Bilal shares his story in an effort to help inspire others to live their best life. This work was selected as the best memoir in the 2019 Pinnacle Book Awards. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And was an SPR finalist this year. Ladies and gentlemen, Bilal Alaji.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's truly an honor to be here with all these distinguished panelists and all of their great history behind them. I resonated with a lot of things that was said. I listened to Ray, and he talked about how we don't believe that we have stories. And I really resonated with that statement, because when you're writing, as Sue was saying, the best thing to do is to be authentic. And that true authenticity only comes from a place of vulnerability. You have to be vulnerable in order to write some of the most intimate things about yourself. And that's what happened to me. My story is very unique because not only am I a male, but I'm speaking as a Black male, and I'm also speaking as a Muslim. And I grew up as a Muslim from birth. And I talk about that experience, how the religion and how all of its context, the dogma and the restrictions and all the things that I learned growing up, how it molded and shaped who I was or who I was to become. And then I talk about all of the nuances and all of the struggles within my family dynamics and social dynamics that caused that particular framework to begin to fall apart. You know, right in the beginning of the story, I talk about my father being a hero to me, and now he's estranged. You know, Diana's talking about her father and how she, at 5, didn't get to experience him. And mine's is kind of the opposite. You know, my father kind of left, you know, my home, and he was my leader. He was my hero. He was my world, and he left, and he just pretty much never looked back. And still to this day, we don't have a relationship. So I talk about how all of this began to have like a emotional effect on me, and also a psychological effect, and how it started to spiral me into a lot of different phases of my life, leading into, criminal court, leading into marriage and having children at a young age, and just having, a lot of ups and downs and no guidance. And it led me, as the story goes on, into depression and then eventually into suicidal thoughts. And so this low point that I went through, it's actually in chapter 14 of the book. Maybe I should show the book too, right?
Sure.
This is the book here. This Ain't My Life.
Nice cover.
And thank you. In chapter 14, I talk about the title of the chapter is Triple Darkness. And triple darkness refers to being in a space where there's no light and you absolutely don't know where you are. You don't know if you're up, down, left, right. You're just in complete, utter darkness. But I talk about how it was through this darkness that my transformation began to take place. And I began to have that spiritual awakening. I began to find myself. But the biggest takeaway from the book for me is the fact that it's the title of the book is This Ain't My Life. And as Sue said, we're always looking for that metaphor to represent who we are and what we're bringing to the table. And for me, This Ain't My Life was that phrase. It was that catchphrase of how I got out of everything. And the last line I say in the book is, if the reality you see is not what you desire it to be, then simply proclaim, this ain't my life. And so I would make these affirmations all the time when I was going through all of these different chapters of my life. And I was saying, this ain't my life. This ain't my life. I wanted something better. I didn't want to accept the reality that I was in. I wanted to get to the point of getting the reality that I was looking for, but I wasn't at that point. I didn't know how to get it. And so the transformation phase started, and I began to learn those steps, and I began to challenge myself, and I began to gain deeper spirituality, deeper understanding. I obtained my master's degree, and I just excelled and became this newly reborn, newly refurbished person. And I wanted to let all men know that it was important for us to have a voice, because as we're sitting here talking about these great memoirs, if you notice, most of them are written by women. And Becoming by Michelle Obama, touche, because it is an excellent memoir.
It is.
But at the same token, I can name a lot of others that are written by females. One is called Educated by Tara Westover, which is extremely bestseller. And she talks about, how she went through not having an education and just being isolated by her family, in an abusive type of way. But you really rarely hear men tell these stories, and men go through these same types of struggles. For me, it was having my children taken away from me and
Wow.
suffering through marriage and then going back and getting custody of them because the woman was unfit, not once, but twice, and dealing
Wow.
with the legal system and, all the frustrations of it. And so I wanted to let men know that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to tell your story. It's okay to have a voice. And it's okay to use that vulnerability in a way to become strong. It doesn't make you weak to have a voice. And by having that voice, you allow others to learn more about yourself, and then you allow yourself to learn more about others. So I want to welcome everyone who's looking to, start that transformation, to pick up this book. And I will say this, I know that what makes memoir so distinctive is the fact that they can cross boundaries of all walks of life. By me reading Diana's story or reading Sue's story, reading Ray's story, I get into their world. I get to learn about what it's like to be a Jew. I get to learn what it's like to have a father that was in the military, because I don't have a military father. And then when you come into my world, you learn about what it's like to be a Black Muslim. And that's what I love about memoirs. It just opens the perspective. It opens the narrative more. And so a lot of the reviews I have are from people who have never experienced those experiences. They come from the Midwest. They come from homogenous communities. And they're saying, wow, this is groundbreaking, because the last time a book like this was written, it was written by the great late Malcolm X, who wrote the autobiography of Malcolm X. And he talked about the experiences that Black men go through and what he experienced as a convert Muslim. Mine's is a little different because I was actually born a Muslim. I'm a third generation Muslim. So I just want to welcome everyone to come and learn about a different experience and learn how to be a better person.
I love how you use the title of the book as your mantra. That is really beautiful. This ain't my life. You know, I can do better than this. That's really amazing. I'm wondering, what was it that inspired you? What was it that made you push yourself out of those situations, do you think?
Well, it was a couple of variables. It was life itself. You know, life can be your best teacher. And when you're going through certain things, and if you're following the flow of life, life will put you in a place that's like, sit down, and this is what you need to do. Not only that, I noticed when I was out in the community and just, you know, I would get into certain segments where I'm talking with people, I realized that there were a lot of the same stories happening. You know, guys were, you know, vicariously talking about child support. Guys were vicariously talking about, you know, different, primarily not having a father at home and how they felt about it, or, you know, just all of these things that were so taboo for them that, you know, I believe it was Ray who talked about how everyone has these glossed out lives because Instagram and Facebook, you know, allows us to present ourselves in a way that's, you know, we don't show that there's other elements to us. There's other sides. So when I was out, I got to see some of these other sides of people. And I realized, I said, man, I'm not the only one. And I do have a very unique approach to how I can share my experiences. And I can articulate it in a way where I believe that, you know, I can not only help people, but I can, you know, open in an intimate way the Pandora's box for a segment of people who don't really talk too much.
Well, thank you, Bilal, and you'll have more time to talk a little later. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Our next speaker is someone that I also know very well, Gerald Everett Jones. He and I have worked together. In fact, we worked on Diana's project together, Flyby. I want to congratulate him. His writing has just been recognized for 2 distinguished favorites by the 2020 Independent Press Awards in the categories Mystery for Preacher Finds a Corpse and Literary Fiction for Clifford Spiral. Congrats, Gerald.
Well, thank you.
Yes, very good.
In terms of memoir, Gerald co-wrote The Light in His Soul, Lessons from My Brother's Schizophrenia with Rebecca Schaefer. That book was a #1 hot new release on Amazon in its category last spring. They also produced it as an audiobook with Runkey Productions. In addition to being a writer, Gerald is also the host of the Get Published podcast. Gerald, take it away.
Well, I thank you, Robin. And yeah, well, I'll just show Rebecca's book here. And she decided to put my name on the title, which was very generous, but this is her story. And, you know, one of the things that I've observed, I've edited some memoirs and then, you know, co-wrote this one. And then also a lot of my fiction does vacuum up episodes from my past. As William Goldman said, everything in your life is material if you live long enough to use it. But one of the things I've learned is that a successful memoirist is a pack rat or a string saver. You know, if you're a young person and, you know, you've got an email, you haven't deleted your email thread and you've got your Facebook album and your iPhotos putting timestamps and locations on your photos, fine. But us boomers, you know, we go back to a time when this electric typewriter was really high tech. You know, you had to write the location and the date on the back of the photographs, and you had to save this stuff in boxes. Now, you know, some of us have got garages full of stuff, you know, and my brother comes along and he says, "What are you doing with all that crap? You got to write your memoirs?" Well, the answer is yes. You know, you better save those diaries, those notes, the journals, your correspondence. And, you know, this is the stuff that you're going to mine. And, you know, when you get to be of an age, your memory is not necessarily going to be able to recall what happened first? What was cause and what was effect? This is one of the things that I actually explore in Clifford's Spiral. Even though it's fiction, Clifford has had a stroke. He's an older fellow. He's had a stroke. And in his recuperation, he's trying to piece together these episodes from his life. And all he has is fragments. Well, one of the things he begins to realize is if you can't remember that the order that things happened in, you don't know which is cause and which is effect. And, the victims could become perpetrators and
it's
vice
like that
versa.
movie Memento.
Well, that's an extreme version. And then actually I did notice just last night, I was watching television and as we are all doing these days. And I saw the HBO ad for this new movie. I know this much. I know this much is true. And it's about a man who has a brother who is suffering from schizophrenia. And I had a stepson who also had schizophrenia. And that was one of the things that informed my work with Rebecca. And in Rebecca's case, she was very much someone who collected her notes, but also she had resolved from a very early date in dealing with her brother that she would get it all on video. So she carried her video camera where she went. So she actually made a documentary that was before she made a book called A Sister's Call. And the thing about her story
This is after
was,
her brother came back, right? That,
her
when she was
brother
trying to help him.
her brother was gone for 20 years.
Hmm.
When he was just in college, he disappeared.
When he started
And-
feeling the effects of the schizophrenia coming on,
Well,
he just
not only
left.
that, but the fact that his mother had died of suicide. His father was suffering from what today would be called PTSD. It was a very troubled family, and he ran away from home. But yes, he was hearing voices. He was having visions. He was afraid. It was a small southern town. He was afraid of peer pressure, of people who might accuse him of being, off. And so he led a life of a homeless person, a drifter, and he came back after 20 years. He showed up on his mother-in-law's doorstep and, "Hi, remember me?" And Rebecca reconnected with him. And for the next 12 years, she took care of his maintenance, made sure he got the right medicines, saw the right professionals.
She
And
helped
he-
him have the best life he could under the
was able to
circumstances.
maintain, and
It's
actually
pretty inspirational.
when he passed away, he died of cancer. He did not kill himself or self-destruct. And the inspirational thing about this book is Rebecca had the belief, she still does to this day, that her brother Carl had spiritual gifts. It's a Rain Man kind of thing, is that these unusual mental states, we think of these people as being dysfunctional, of being antisocial, but actually in our ostracizing them or attempting to manage them and in attempting to give them palliative drugs, we also tend to ignore any special gifts. I mean, here Mozart composing at age 3. I mean, come on, this is not a normal person. Moses hearing the burning bush, that's not normal either. St. Paul on the road to Damascus, suddenly there's a bright light and he says, "Oh, my name's Paul. I'm going to go preach everywhere at every temple of Isis in the Mediterranean." Well, why? Isis was shown everywhere with her baby in her arms, the son Horus. And Paul said to these people, "Oh, well, no, she's got a different name now. That's Mary and her son Jesus." So, these people would have been considered, they were persecuted for being unusual in their time, but that's part of what Rebecca has in her book is an appreciation, and that's her platform now. She's dealing with the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and originally they said we don't endorse books. She's now lectured at 2 of their conferences. They've endorsed her book, and she's pushing for greater funding for mental illness research and a better treatment of people who've been marginalized. So Wonderful.
That's really wonderful. You're the host of the Get Published radio show, and I listened to the segment that you did on Memoir. It was really good. And you talked a little bit about, we see movies and we see the phrase inspired by a true story. How much different is such a movie from what really happened in real life when we see that inspired by a true story?
Hollywood is an extreme case. I mean, Hollywood, when they option a life story, and I actually know this from experience, from the legal aspect of it, they're under no obligation to tell the truth. They have bought your life story. They have bought it as a story and a brand. And the extreme example is they bought the book called The Joy of Sex, and all they kept was the title. Okay. Now, what if you sell your life story or the rights to your book? A clause in those contracts where you give them life story rights or you option life story rights will be that you would be the technical advisor on the project. Some people incorrectly assume that means that they have approval over the script. They do not. It may give you the ability to go to the set a couple of times and to say, this is my book, but actually in reality. So inspired by a true story, part of this has to do with when it's fictionalized, as it often must be. Especially to make it more dramatic. To make it more dramatic, conflict is drama. A good story, badly told, sounds like a bad story. So, you not only need to change names if you can't necessarily get people to sign off on their portrayal. You actually must change locations. So, if I say it happened in Chicago and, Bilal Alaji is the person that I'm depicting, I might change the name to Ray Richmond. I might even change the name and the sex to Sue William Silverman so that, and I said it in New York, and because the definition is, can Bilal's neighbors see this movie and go, that's Bilal?
Right.
Okay. If they can, you're probably in trouble.
Right.
Now, in a memoir, if you want to use real names in real places and real events, then you really do need to pay attention to getting waivers and permissions and all that stuff. And if it is made into a movie, the studio has what they call a rights and permissions department, and they will what they call vet the book. And they will actually go through and tell you which releases they need. And if they don't get them, either the person is getting written out of the script, or their identity is going to be obscured or fictionalized, or they're just not going to make your movie. So that's the difference between inspired by and if they say based on a true story, that usually means that it's a bit more factual. Inspired by is kind of gives them a little bit of wiggle room of, well, yeah, it's all fiction, but we read Diana's story, and when she was flying in that it was a P-39, right?
P-51.
P-51. I guess that's a spoiler, but she flew her father's plane. It's like that took guts.
I bet it was thrilling.
That took guts.
If I was going to ever have my story told in memoir form on a screen, I would want the disclaimer to be most of this shit didn't really happen.
Well, it's all those ex-wives that gets you into trouble too.
Exactly.
So as I was doing research for this panel, I found that I tend to think of memoir as art of the heart, as Lisa C. would say. And there was a columnist who really felt it was works by narcissists. Why do you think that, memoir sometimes gets a bad reputation like that?
Well, I think narcissism in general gets a bad rap. I think, yes, you have to have a certain amount of narcissism in order to tell your story accurately. As I tell all of my clients, I'm not really big on humility. I want you to think you're the coolest person that ever lived, and that will come through in the page.
I love that.
I actually disagree. but that's coming from a non-celebrity sort of writer.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
How do you
if-
disagree?
well, if we were narcissists, we would want to show ourselves in a really positive light. And for me, just the opposite is true. I mean, I show my very, very emotionally messy life and all the mistakes that I've made. And I'm much harder on myself in my writing than I am on anybody else. So for more just kind of literary writers and memoirists, it is nothing about narcissism whatsoever. It's really getting to that really usually messy emotional truth.
Well, Sue, you had it right when you were talking about the memoir having a theme as opposed to, an autobiography or a biography is a life story. But a memoir, typically, it's got a theme. It'll have a lesson learned, or it'll be very selective about events. And one of the things that when I'm involved in business writing, we talk about lessons learned being turned into best practices. And I would caution memoirists, you're absolutely right. You're all right about going down into the soul, because, you don't really know what it is you're going to express. You have to express, but you don't really know what it is until you've gone down there to where the pain is and dragged it out. But the writers of nonfiction books who may be placing themselves in the guise of an expert, which many of them are, and the book is their credential, but I would caution memoirists that line of demarcation between lesson learned and best practices. Yes, give us the lesson learned, give us the inspiration, but when you get into best practices, there's a risk that you're going to be selling vitamins. Okay, if I see a Facebook and it's okay, the new thing that's been discovered about fibromyalgia, okay, which sounds very authoritative, but then it turns out this person's got a food supplement. No, I don't want to read that book.
The title of this panel is The Allure of the Memoir, telling the human story. Do you see the allure of the memoir any differently now, given our current moment in history when we're all hunkered down because of the coronavirus?
I do. I mean, I think that the pandemic enhances the need for kind of personal narrative. And because I think memoir engenders empathy and humanity and really helps with the human connection. So that now, as we're feeling we really are isolated, I think that that memoir is even more important in terms of making us feel more connected with each other. When I've published my different books, I always receive like hundreds of emails from mainly women who thank me for telling their stories too. And so they feel empowered, but I also feel empowered. And so now, I mean, memoir is just a really kind of beautiful and moving and spiritual way to bring people together.
I think you're 100% correct, but I find also that what makes memoirs so special is that you can really get into someone else's life and you can learn something from a distance or from a different time frame. And when you're in a pandemic and you're looking for answers and you're looking for resolve, some type of perseverance, you can read great people who have went through, hard times and they've persevered through other situations, which will shed some light on you and give you this like roadmap and, sort of structure how you can come out of that or deal with it at least. And I also find that during this time, it's a great time that people are still and they can do a lot more reflection. This is a time of personal development. And I think when personal development comes, you find answers, you find things that you just weren't finding before. It's almost like cleaning your house and you just happen to find something behind the couch because you moved it a little bit. And, that's what the memoir does. It gives you something that you may not even knew you was looking for. And it just comes and pops right out of that memoir. And you now say, oh, wow, I can do something different with my life. I could take a different approach because you have all of these examples and storylines to kind of guide you. And
it's like we can dig deeper into our hearts and our souls.
Absolutely.
Well,
to see
folks,
some-
I'm
Right.
afraid that we're running out of time. And I think we could have gone on for another
Oh,
hour.
man.
So-
Easily.
Everyone that's watching this, I want to remind you that engaging and inspiring memoirs are a great way to spend your time that you have right now when you're hunkered down. And after this event, Sue, Bilal, Gerald, and Diana will all be doing their Ask an Author chats. You can feel free to join them in the LA BookFest chat room and connect with them there. So thank all of you for joining this panel.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
folks, go read a
Thanks
good
for having us.
memoir.
Yes. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.